You are viewing Master John. Okay, that's good. I don't see,
Is the agenda on? Up?
I see it.
Okay, great. Okay, I'd like to welcome.
Recorded it?
Yeah.
You recorded. Okay.
Yeah.
I think I should too, right? Yes.
I'd like to welcome participants to the virtual planning board meeting of May 10th. I'd like to take a call to order at this time. Mr. Coons.
Present.
Ms. Delicio.
Here.
Ms. Foley.
Here.
Mr. Gilbert.
Here.
Mr. Olney.
I'm here.
Mr. Russell.
Here.
Okay, looks like we have a full quorum tonight. Before we get started, I'd like to remind all board members, guests to be recognized by the chair if they wish to speak. This meeting is being recorded. First item on the agenda is receipt of correspondence. And Helene, I believe there was none.
Correct. Correct.
Okay, at this time, I would like to ask for any public comments on any items not on the agenda with a limited amount of time, 2 minutes. Would anybody from the public like to speak? Okay, thank you. So next item, at last week's Board of Selectmen meeting, town warrant articles were being vetted. A citizen's petition article to amend the general earth removal bylaw was submitted. The bylaw expressed safety concerns over blasting for large-scale developments. The Board of Selectmen has asked the planning board to weigh in on this article and give a position on its merits. The article was saved to our SharePoint site, along with other documentations received from Fire Chief Cleary. I've asked Fire Chief Cleary to attend our meeting tonight and give a little information on current safety rules and regulations for blasting. And so at this time, I would offer Chief Cleary to say a few words to us.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me at the meeting tonight. I appreciate it. With respect to the Article 12 petition, it does speak of the consideration of safety and health for the use of dynamite or other explosives with respect to a commercial structure more than 100,000 square feet or any individual structure in the town containing more than 20 housing units. My review of that and my review of the blasting laws, there's no restriction with respect to the amount of space or the amount of units contained within the state law. I will tell you that blasting regulations, they're regulated in Massachusetts by 527 CMR, which regulation that applies to explosive licensing, permitting, storage, sales, use, transportation, and manufacture of explosives, and is administered through the Department of Fire Services, Division of Fire Safety. Further regulations are provided by Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, Department of Transportation, OSHA, and the Mine Safety and Health Administration. So the current blasting regulations require blasting licenses, certificate of competency, explosives user certificate, a use and handling permit to transport, and a sale of explosive material. There are laws governing the storage and transportation, and specifically with the use of explosive materials, a blast analysis must be conducted. A very thorough blast design plan must be laid out. There are allowable limits to the effect of blasting. There are pre-blast inspection surveys, and they will receive any blasting damage complaints. Currently, in order to get a blasting permit, you have to come into the fire station, apply for it, provide the adequate licensure. There are pre-check-off lists. There are site visits. They have to provide a survey of any properties. Also, while blasting is going on, they have a blasting detail by trained firefighters in addition to any of the state agencies that wish to participate. So it is a very robust and lengthy code and requirements that they must follow in order to maintain safety. So with respect to the size of a building, there's nowhere mentioned that in here at all about any restrictions on the amount of area to be blasted, other than how it affects the surrounding areas, building structures, things like that. And there's nothing in the blasting regulations that speaks to residential or commercial housing units or what's going to be built as a result of the blasting. With respect to the safety contention, I see that as really a moot point, because until all these requirements are met, no blasting can happen. It's my understanding that they don't use dynamite anymore, so the restriction on dynamite may also be a moot point. But there are very many checks and balances in state agencies that oversee blasting, so it cannot happen in a haphazard sort of way. So I'm having a hard time making a link to these two contentions having anything to do with the relative safety of the blasting process.
Okay, thank you, Chief Cleary. Any comments from the board or questions for the chief?
I have a comment.
Mr. Olney?
So this seems to me a rather obvious attempt to try to obstruct the development of the 40B project. And my sense is that if this were to go into effect, there'd be an immediate lawsuit and the town would bear the expense of probably a rather costly and ineffective defense. And I think the town should be opposed to this, any kind of, it's so arbitrary. 20 units, what if they were proposing 19 units? Does that mean you don't have to get any special dispensation from the planning board? I think it's a waste of time and effort, frankly.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Olney. Yeah. Any
Can I
other
speak to that
comments?
as well?
Yes, Mr. Cleary.
Just to follow up. Under the Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 148, under fire prevention, and I'm quoting here, it says, cities and towns may also make and enforce ordinances and bylaws not inconsistent with said rules and regulations relative to the subject matter of this section, which is blasting. Each city or town shall submit a copy of each such ordinance or bylaws to the Board of Blasting within 10 days of passage thereof. Any ordinance or bylaw regulating blasting operations or the use, handling, transportation, or storage of dynamite or gunpowder shall not take effect until such ordinance or bylaw is approved by the State Blasting Board, except that such ordinance or bylaw that has not been approved or disapproved by the board within 90 days after the receipt thereof shall be deemed to have been approved. So there is a state agency that then, even if a bylaw was made or approved, would still have to pass muster with the State Blasting Board before it could actually be put into effect. And they would be able to weigh in on the validity of the value of that bylaw change.
Okay, thank you, Chief Cleary. Any other comments from the board or your questions to the chief?
Yes, Ron, if I may.
Yes, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, I just would like, well, first of all, thanks to Chief Cleary for reviewing this and coming to the meeting tonight. I think this is completely unnecessary, given all the checks and balances already in place by the state. And I'm concerned that the part about guidelines promulgated by the board for the safe and effective use of blasting, we're clearly not qualified to create guidelines for safe blasting. We would simply be referring to all of the research that's already embedded into the state laws. And also, we have a difficult time promulgating any regulations, actually. So I think this would be a waste of time on our part. I would also like to agree with Chris that this is, a very, I wouldn't even say it's thinly veiled effort to take a swipe at the particular 40B project. It's very obvious. And with that note, I think we should also be looking at the other warrant article about requiring 2 access roads. So perhaps we can review that with the chief at another meeting. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Russell. Any other comments? On this. Otherwise, I would take a motion to not move this forward and not endorse this. And let
Ron,
the,
this is Christine. I had my hand raised. So what
Oh, sorry.
exactly are you looking for?
the
I mean,
Board of
this is
Select-
a citizen's petition, so it's not our place to
the
move it
Board of
forward.
the Board of Selectmen, and perhaps Becky can comment on this, has asked us to weigh in on this. And since it's a modification to the general bylaw, they have asked the planning board to give an opinion on this particular petition. Becky, did I get that correct?
Yes, Ron, that's exactly it.
So could we talk about what this motion, I mean, I just don't know. The 40B and the purpose of the 40B is to alleviate all zoning requirements that aren't, to alleviate zoning requirements. So this would be alleviated regardless if they were going to go forward. So I don't think this is it's a valiant attempt to do it's obvious that it's being done, but I don't think it would make that much of a difference. So I guess what was the motion that you were proposing, Ron?
Christine, this would not be waived. This is a general bylaw, not a zoning bylaw.
But that's the purpose of the 40B, is to waive bylaws.
No,
No.
not all, no, zoning bylaws, not bylaws.
Excuse me, Chair, may I make a comment?
Yes, Ms. Jakes.
Christine, I'm not sure how you came to that perspective regarding the zoning bylaws and quite how you're phrasing that about the 40B. But regarding this particular warrant article that's been brought forward, the discussion of the 40B is not relevant to that.
Exactly, so that's
we're-
fine. So I just was asking what the wording was.
May I
going to be.
finish?
That's it.
May I finish,
Yes,
please?
yes, please don't interrupt.
Thank you.
Go ahead,
Thank you,
Becky.
Chair. Thank you. We're just asking you all to weigh in and give the Board of Selectmen your collective perspective on this and whether you as a board would recommend it, regardless to any specific future applications. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Becky. So
So
with that
in light, Ron, could I finish
Go
my
ahead.
statement from before
Yes,
I was
Miss-
interrupted? So in light of the chief's expertise on this, I would just maybe say, maybe it's not the board's place to say this. Maybe it's the chief's place to speak on this.
The Board of Selectmen has specifically asked the planning board to weigh in on this proposed article. So
Okay.
they've put it in our wheelhouse.
Okay, so
and
what,
And the chief has also made comments to the Board of Selectmen at their meeting last week. Correct me if I'm wrong, chief, but you also
No,
spoke
that's
then.
correct. I've given them written perspective on it when it first came out, as well as addressed it last week.
I mean, I
So,
really am not in a position to make comments about blasting, so I really don't have much to add to the conversation.
Ron, Mary has her hand up.
Mary, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, hi, thanks. Yeah, just to throw in comments, I'm not really sure where the planning board would fall on this in the sense that if citizens want to bring a an article to vote. I mean, obviously, the planning board could have an opinion, but it's within the rights of citizens to bring what they want as to vote as an article, so I wouldn't see blocking that at all. It's just my opinion.
Yeah, well, the selectmen usually give weigh in on these articles. Becky, correct me if I'm wrong, but they were vetting the articles of the citizens article at their meeting last week. And they were deciding, what their position was on these articles brought by the citizens. And this one got passed down to us. And they,
If
and
I
they
may.
will- Go ahead, Becky.
I was just going to say, yes, that is correct. And regarding citizens bringing forward petitions, yes, of course, that's, that's part of the way it all works. The other way it all works in conjunction with that is with the guidance of the town, because the citizens, though many of them know some of the bylaws or ways that the local and state bylaws work, none of us knows them all. So that's why we are asked to weigh in and help provide guidance as to the applicability of a warrant article or the lack thereof. So this is why we have asked the planning board, which is land use oversight, to look into this. Does it fall in your purview? Do the bylaws that you all work with come into play here? Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Becky. So I would entertain a motion to, on this article, if there are no further comments.
Ron? Lauren Coons.
Yes, Mr. Coons.
I'll make a motion to, we want to recommend passing over the petition of the citizens for Article 12.
Okay, is there a second?
Ron, I'll second, but with just a question, if for public record, if we need to have a reason that we recommend passing it over as part of the motion.
Mhm. We could have a reason. I am thinking of a friendly amendment to that instead of passing over, that we say that we do not endorse this. I would think we would be not passing it over, but not endorsing it.
And
Ron, I agree with that comment. It's not about passing over. It's that we're not in agreement with this proposal. And we're the ones that administer the earth removal bylaws. So this is directly related to the planning board, just to clarify that.
Mr. Coons, would you accept the friendly amendment?
absolutely.
Okay. So let's restate the motion. The planning board does not, well, can somebody give me some language here? Does not recommend the citizens petition on blasting Article 12.
Yeah, I'll second that.
Okay, but motion's been made and seconded. Is there any further discussion? Okay, with that in mind, I'll take a vote. Mr. Coons,
Yes,
Ms. Delicio,
Sorry, I'm having some technical I'm going to abstain.
Ms. Foley,
Yes.
Mr. Gilbert,
I'm in favor of passing over it or opposing it, yes.
we're not using Passover.
Oh, what's the word?
Opposing it. We're not recommending it, this
Yeah.
Article 12.
Yes.
Mr. Olney,
Yes,
Mr. Russell,
Yes.
and the board and the chair votes yes. Okay, Next item on the agenda is a discussion on the redirection of scope and schedule for the else limited commercial district. With the planning board voting to end further pursuit of the 40R specifications, Sue Brown has been speaking with MAPC about using remaining funding in a different way in the LCD. Sue has confirmed an adjusted scope with MAPC and EOEEA. Sue, is that correct? And I would like the planning board, well, I'd first like Sue to speak on that, and then the planning board to weigh in on this approach with the uses, densities, boundaries, things like that. So Sue, can you give us an update on what your talks have gone?
Sure, thanks, Ron. So because we are no longer pursuing the 40R, there is funding or scope left over that we can pivot with. I've checked with MAPC about a change in scope. I've checked in with the funder, and they are all in agreement that if we want to do what I'm about to share with you, that we can use those funds for those purposes, provided they're done by the end of the fiscal year, which is June, the end of June. So it is a tight turnaround, but what the scope is imagined to be is the planning board will come up with 2 or 3 scenarios that have that they would like to compare. The difference in the scenarios in my mind would be about the density of use and perhaps the change in use. So it would also need to identify where the boundaries would be for the district. And again, if there's more than just, if we want to prescribe more than just use, we would need to put out those assumptions. For example, some amount of open space or some setback or whatever. But at the minimum, it would be a variety of, identify the uses, the general density, and the district boundaries. MAPC will then take those scenarios, provide a conceptual layout of how they might fit on the land based on what each would need for parking, et cetera, and understanding what are the best adjacencies. And then they would create so you would have a picture of each scenario, if you will, and then it would create a matrix, an evaluation matrix, so you could compare each one in terms of the amount of space it would be using, developable space would be using, maybe the amount of parking, parking spots that would be generated, the amount of revenue that would be generated, the amount of water, sewer that would be required for each of these scenarios. So it's similar to what we did in the land use, housing, and economic development plan, except with those, we didn't have a perspective, a picture from the sky, if you will, of what that might look like as a neighborhood. So if we can figure out those 3 scenarios, MAPC will do that work. It can be an iterative process, a little bit back and forth, as long as we have the time to do that. And then what we would hope would happen is that the board could agree on a scenario that makes the most sense. And if we can do that in a timely manner, we could use the balance of the scope to draft out those regulations, the zoning regulations for an overlay district. So I'm happy to answer questions.
Yeah, why is there a time constraint on this?
Because the
Grant
funds
runs
need
out?
to be used in the fiscal year.
I see.
Almost all grants are that way.
Okay. Any comments from the board on this approach?
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Mr. Russell.
I'm sure everyone knows my opinion about this already. I'll just state for the record, I think this is a really good idea to pivot let's use the funds to complete a lot of work that we'd already started. And a special thanks to Sue, because I think the application was very well written and the explanation has been great. So thank you for all of your work on that.
Yep, same here too. Do we want to start to decide on these approaches today?
That would be my preference because we are under a time constraint, and I'm happy to provide some information to kind of get to the density issue. The last time we went over the uses that we thought would be acceptable. So I would love to start putting out, crafting what those 3 scenarios might be and come to an agreement so we could start the process.
Okay.
I might recommend that to start, if you're looking to say, well, how much should we do? I might recommend starting with something very similar to what Mr. Simboli put out. We agree that was a fairly dense development, but I think that would give us one level to show maybe the most revenue or the high end of revenue with that mix of uses. So I wouldn't be afraid to try to see what a certain density would provide, and then go down or change the uses from there. But that's just a recommendation, a thought of starting there.
All right, Mary, you raised your hand.
Yeah, I just looking for some clarification. Is this now looking on commercial development? Is this just kind of repackaging of 40R, a mixed use? Because we were with the 40R for 2 years, and I think we got a lot of input from residents, and so I want to make sure we're hearing what people are saying and kind of going in that right direction.
So it's different from a 40R in that we're not required to have anything by right. But it is a good idea when you're changing zoning to have some things right by right. But I think the objection to at least the residential that we heard is that you don't want it by right. But I think that a mixed use is still what people, or what I know is consistent with what the master plan's done. So I would recommend that it would be a mix of use, but I'm happy to hear what the board has to say. And part of the recommendation on the mix of uses, we know that a developer the principal developer there is interested in an assisted living facility, and I would strongly support a mix of uses that would be consistent with that use there. So I would personally think that you would want to think about that use in the context that you would be providing for it.
Mr. Gilbert, Mr. Gilbert, you have your hand raised.
Thank you, Ron. I support this idea, but I think I'd rather submit some comments in writing for each of the 3 scenarios very specifically. I think for us to get the most mileage out of someone developing sort of what I think I'm hearing is sort of a conceptual site plan or site development. I think we should try to be as specific as we can because we'll get the most information back out of it if we are specific. What Mr. Simboli proposed was really vague on a lot of levels, understandably, but it would be nice if we could suggest a specific list of uses that would be more intense, and then another one that would be quite a bit less so, and then another one maybe with just some isolated land uses there, to see 3 very different as possible scenarios. So I think if we were to put together some comments in writing as to the types of uses of each of the 3 plans, if we could suggest the kind of building types we'd like to see, whether we want to see, a 4-story, like an office building that's no more than 4 stories of a certain footprint. If we want to try to ballpark that, we could also make a list of the kind of parking strategies that we would prefer to see in all of them or each one of them, and potentially the size of the amount of uses or units on some of them. I think we'll get the most bang for our buck if we're more specific and do a little bit of homework before asking them to go. Now, I hope this is not in contradicts what Sue was saying about timeline.
Yeah, that would be
Well-
my only concern is if we don't give them something until the beginning of June and expect them to have something, a good product at the end of June. I think if we can start something and then massage it as we go along, it might be a better use of our time.
Well, yeah, well, Gary, you mentioned a lot of things. I think we need a framework of what we're commenting on. Otherwise, we can be all over the place. It sounds like we want to, first off, is 3 the number of types of scenarios, Sue, that they would study?
3 is the maximum
3
number.
is the maximum, okay.
And if we don't need 3, maybe you'll get more out of 2. But if there are 3 different scenarios.
But then, yeah, but then Gary, you mentioned parking, and then you went to, you mentioned a lot of things for us to comment on, and maybe we need to have some kind of framework. This would be my thought of what we're commenting on and where we're heading. I see Gary Russell has his hand up. I saw you first, Gary.
Thanks, Ron. So my sort of quick take on this would be that I think Sue is right. We should start with some project that is fairly similar in the scope, well, maybe not the total scope of the Symboli proposal, because I think it was a little too broad. I know that's not necessarily our job, but if we're looking at scenarios, I would look at a more reasonable sized Symboli sort of project, which is a mix of a lot of different uses and some very specific uses. There's the hotel, senior housing, medical offices. How that all fits together would be very interesting to look at as a mixed use project. I also think we would want a proposal that looked at mixed use in more of the sort of light industrial manufacturing, arts and crafts kind of uses that we've talked about, so that you could imagine a different building typology and perhaps size and scope of those buildings, but still mixing uses. And then in terms of the third use, or scenario, I don't know if this aligns with what MAPC might be looking at, and Sue can comment, but I would think we would also take a look at if we looked at the current zoning and look at what changes to make the existing zoning more successful. So in other words, it would still primarily be industrial, office, medical, allowed uses now, but what are the
No
factors
housing.
that are holding those projects back?
Okay.
Oh, and one more thing, sorry. So, sorry, I know I spat out a lot, but if I'm speaking for myself, if time is a crunch, we could propose a special meeting just for this topic to help make sure that MAPC is getting the feedback they need.
Okay, understood. Thank you.
Thanks, Gary.
Thank you, Gary. Chris Olney, you're next.
So I agree with Gary, and I guess with Sue, one of the things that's obvious is that we should look at Symboli's proposal and evaluate it because he's put it on the table. I would think in terms of an alternate, there's a lot of talk about a corporate headquarters or just one big facility there that has been talked about a little bit. And I wonder if we shouldn't look at that as if someone wanted to put a big corporate headquarters of, couple 100,000 square feet, would that work? What would that do for the town? Just so we can either get it off or on the table. And I also kind of like the idea of looking at the existing zoning and saying, well, as Gary said, why doesn't this work now? And what would be a full build out under the current zoning if somebody were to propose something there? I also like the idea of a special meeting to work with MAPC, face to face to discuss some of these things.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Olney. And Ms. Delicio, you haven't spoken yet. Have your hand up. Christine?
I'm trying, sorry, I'm having technical difficulties. So I have a question before I answer. So does MAPC, do these three scenarios have to have housing?
They don't have to have housing, but if they don't have housing, I would say that we would not be moving forward to develop the regulations.
Okay, so I guess then my three scenarios would be very similar. I guess on one end would just have assisted living. And if that's comparable, if that's acceptable, and then I do like maybe mostly industrial and some version of the current Symboli project. So I think as little housing as possible that would not impact the school district needs to be on one end, and then on the other end, a full scale scenario.
Thank you, Christina. Mary, you want to speak again?
Oh, I was just going to, throw out the scenarios that I kind of agreed with what people had mentioned. And I'm assuming we're looking at the same overlay district that was proposed before, that wasn't mentioned, but I think one, we should just work directly with Symboli. He came to us with some proposals, and assisted living was involved in that. So I think, be kind of a no-brainer just to work with him on this. And then that kind of one big commercial possibility, and kind of see where revenue generation falls out, and water impact, wastewater, all that kind of stuff, and just kind of try to keep it simple, high level, and that's it.
So can I ask another question? I'm sorry. Is it possible, Sue, to have like, this was maybe pie in the sky version? So if I really was going to do this, this is what I want, like tailored conversation with Symboli before?
So do you mean I think you mean to change up the multi-use, if you will, the Symboli plan to come to some agreement on a scaled down version?
Correct.
Is that what maybe I'm hearing?
Yes, correct.
Yeah, I think he would be open to that. I would certainly be open to that.
Okay, Sue, Mary brings up a good point on the boundaries. Are we talking specifically on the east side here? So are we creating an overlay? Are we being specific to this area, that this 40-acre area on the east side?
So that was part of what I said we should decide on, whether it is an overlay that involves both sides of the road, or just the east side of the road. So Symboli, town-owned, Brady side. So I think that's in our. Yeah, that's a question. It has to be somewhat confined to either one of those options or the other, because we really have a limited amount of scope, and to show it a perspective that you could really get any information out in terms of here's what the character of it might be like. I think that's the most reasonable piece of pie that you could do that with.
Okay, thank you.
Does the board want to kind of offer whether they think it should be on one or both sides?
Yeah, Mr. Gilbert, you have your hand up. Do you want to comment on that?
Not on the one or both sides of the road issue, but I'd like to comment that if we want to see what a build out would be with the zoning we've got, it seems to me the one thing that should change, and that's that approach, would be using setback criteria that's more normal to a commercial district. I think that's a huge stumbling block that was put there intentionally to stop growth. Our goal here is to try to raise around $2 to $3 million in additional revenue in the town. And we're not going to get anywhere close to that with the kind of regulations we have in a full build out. So I would think that at least that would have to be modified. And then if we're going to have another meeting to talk with them, I strongly encourage that we all be asked, anyone's interested in participating, to write down specific scenario A, B, and C, instead of us coming to meetings like often happens and people are just, well, they sort of come up with a response on the moment, let's call it. And it may not be nearly as well thought through as if it was written down and thought about ahead of time. So it might be nice to circulate everyone's written thoughts about it and then discuss it at the next meeting.
I think we're moving towards consensus on the 3 types of studies, though. I think we were moving that direction.
Well, what
with-
kind of uses would be in the middle-sized scenario? I don't think that's, I think that's worth trying to articulate.
That, okay.
And we don't need to be so specific as to say whether they're office or other medical, or whether it's, I think we can, this is not super specific like the style. I do like the idea of testing whether going up in height, for example, to allow a greater height compared to a more moderate height, or, a 35 feet or what we currently use. I think those comparisons are helpful in terms of showing how much land can be saved from the development envelope if you do things like that. So I do think there are some design features of the building themselves that would be helpful to compare.
That's what I'm trying to suggest, Sue. The 35-foot height is based, that's what people use for residential building neighborhoods. That's a standard. This is not a residential neighborhood. So that height, that's one of the parameters that need to be changed.
So I would think if you want to do something with your current zoning, you might want to use it as if we might propose some changes. So I agree, allowing a little more height there, allowing some different setbacks and things might be a helpful thing to consider.
Okay, thanks. And I got Chris, then Gary, then Christina. Yeah, Chris, go ahead.
So I'm trying to think what I was going to say. I'm going to pass for the moment.
Okay.
Except I will say that I don't think discussing the weeds like setbacks is very useful at this stage. I think we should just be talking about uses and refine it all much later.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Gary, Russell.
Hi, I was going to comment on the district boundary issue.
Yes.
I do think that we need to have a discussion that clearly we come to agreement on what an overlay district boundary would look like. But for the sake of this scenario, I would suggest that at least one of the scenarios include the properties across the street. So the Brown Family Trust 40B site, as well as the Doggy Depot site, because so in one case, we don't know what the future is with the 40B. In the other case, we know we have an owner of a property with one use that is really limited in terms of what they want to do with their business. And I do think it's useful, and I think it's important to keep that owner in the conversation, or keep that owner in mind. But more importantly, this would be a useful scenario just for any future 40B discussions as well, which will surely happen, where if the 40B doesn't happen, we could have a scenario that says, well, this is what the build out would look like if someone said, okay, no housing, too bad, we're going to do what's allowed under zoning. So that's just a thought, but I do think that discussion about whether we include the other side of the street is important. Just because the 40B isn't happening as a friendly project, I don't think we should ignore the work that we had started with the boundary across the street.
Okay, thank you, Gary. Christina?
So, Gary, Russell, I liked your idea of what's preventing this from going forward? Why isn't it being developed? And so for that part of it, I think we should include the other half. I have heard, things that people would like to do things over there. They're just not ready to talk about them yet, potentially. I am concerned about the race to water that could happen with just this one particular section. So in my opinion, I do think that we should look at both properties to see what could happen. That was my initial thought that this was going to include. So if we do get to remold this, I suggest both sites, not just the other side of School Street, but the other side of the LCD additionally.
Okay, I see no other raised hands. Chris, did your thoughts come back or are you set?
Actually, they did come back.
Oh,
So
okay.
one of the things that occurs to me is that the zoning regulations that we come up with, even if we just confine it to the School Street side, they might actually apply to the Pine Street properties later down the road. So we could just expand the overlay district later when it's appropriate to. But I don't think working on the regulations for one thing necessarily prevents them from being applied anywhere else.
Except they're restricted by the amount of land, but yes.
Ron, can I just
Yes.
clarify
Yes.
something? I
Yes.
think when we were talking about the site, whether it was on both sides, I was talking about whether it was on both sides of the street, not on east and both sides of School Street, not whether it was the east side of the whole district and the west side of the whole district. I don't know if that's what Gary was talking about, and I don't think that that's what Christina was saying. So I just wanted to clarify that I think our site, I meant the east and west side of School Street, not the east and west side of the district.
Yes, Ron, for clarity, that's what I was speaking of as well, is the former, if you will, abandoned 40R district boundary, which is still just the east side of the LCD, but it's both sides of Pine Street.
Okay, great. Looks like we've exhausted the comments. I think we have a limited time to get this free study to us. Sue, I think you got a flavor of which way the board is going. I think they want to do 3 types of scenarios. I think they want to study both. I mean, I don't want to speak for everyone, but I think we want to study both sides. I don't know about, should we have another meeting now? Does anyone like this idea of writing things down and submitting ahead of our next meeting? Thoughts on process, Sue? Could you help me out on this?
Sure, thanks. So if I were to reiterate the 3 scenarios, I think that what I've heard is a little bit of a scaled back mixed use based roughly on the uses that Symboli put forward. Then one that looks at our current zoning with some changes to see what a build out under that would look like. And then one large building. So 2 of those do not have any housing unless we, under our current zoning, are thinking that we'd also use the potential change for the conservation, cluster conservation bylaw, which says that you can take a site and through a special permit have housing. So I'm just trying to see if there's housing in anything other than the mixed use. And I just want some clarification from the board on that.
All right, Mary, did you want to speak on that?
Yeah,
Your hand up.
this might be stepping back a little bit, but before we delve into any of this, are we clear, like with this land on one side and the other side, the where the waters are, where the conservation land is, which lots are buildable, which are not buildable? I mean, do we have a map that's clearly showing what we're looking at and what we need to avoid?
Yeah, we have enough information on that. We would use the layers in our GIS and just offset a certain distance from wetland resources and something. Remember, this is at a high level. This is certainly not a development plan, but it's a conceptual plan that could hopefully allow people to say, this seems to be suitable. It seems to generate the revenue that we're looking for, and it doesn't seem to have impacts that are unmanageable. So I think that's the level that we're looking at. You know, this is just that, it's that high. So we do have the amount of information we need for that type of assessment. Mhm.
So is that a map out on the town website?
No, it's a map that we would create. So the layers are in the towns and the state's GIS database for wetlands and those type of things. And then we
Sure.
would just offset off those to create a development area.
Yeah, no, and I know how to get those. I just thought for planning purposes, if we had that as a starting point, we know what we're, you know, really what the size and the scope that we're looking at, excluding all of these areas that we need to avoid. I just thought that would be a logical starting point.
So that's where we will start, with also punched out of that the development pads, if you will, that shows where the building sits, and if we can't get the parking under it, where the parking would go. So it's a picture of a build out that we're hoping will give people some confidence or some maybe a more clear idea of what the impacts to the land would be.
So what I thought I heard there would be mixed in 2 of the 3 scenarios. I didn't think that housing was eliminated from, maybe I heard that wrong. I thought we had a dense kind of scenario and then a less, both with mixed use, and then one with just what our existing bylaws say now, which is basically a commercial scenario. Am I wrong? Did I?
I like that approach. I think that would, in the end, that would be the most useful, but I also heard someone mention that it would be good to know what one large building would look like. And maybe that's a different study, but I heard that too. So I just want to, I don't want to I want to get some clarity from the board, what they think is most useful.
Well, let's hear from our planning group, Mr. Olney.
So I think we've all pretty much agreed that a pure housing option is not viable. It's not a good idea for the town. So I think we'd take that off the table. And I think
I don't think that was on the table. Sorry, Chris.
Wasn't on the table.
Oh, okay. I thought you wanted to make sure that was the case.
No. I was trying one large building as in terms of the, I think they were thinking the industrial research and development type building.
And of course, that's allowed under the current zoning, is it not?
Yes, it could be.
So that maybe those two scenarios, the one big building and the existing zoning could be combined into a single.
Yeah. So yeah, we could do that.
So I think it would be one scenario would be what's currently allowed under zoning with changes to setbacks and height limitations. One would be a medium density build out, and the third would mixed use build out, and the third would be the full blown modified symbolic plan.
Mr. Russell?
Oh, I'm good now. Thank you, Chris. It's basically kind of my comments. I think that would be a good selection from my point of view.
Okay.
Glad to help.
Ms. Foley? Or is that a?
No, that was a new one. I just, as Chris was speaking, we did have somebody come and with our current zoning, obviously, yes, we'd have to adjust setbacks and height. So you can't kind of have that one big building / research development currently. So it would have to be that option of changing our current zoning bylaws.
Ron?
Yes, Miss Brown, sorry.
I think you could, I think you could probably have that currently. I think it would be a very large footprint if we stuck with the current height changes, but I actually think it would, probably, I'm quite certain it would fit under our current zoning. I don't think we would like it under our current regulations, but I do think that size of building would fit. So that's one reason to adjust things like height so that we could make it fit and present something that might be a viable option. But if that approach is what we're talking about, which is what I think I'm hearing from Chris and Gary and others, is that if we can kind of meld those to make an actual viable alternative, which that's what I would hope we would come out of these is, some good alternatives. I think that would be doable.
Thank you. Ms. Delicio?
So I guess my question is, I think what Mary might be thinking is that would not be feasible on the other side, on the Pine Street side, correct? So I guess that is my concern. I feel like if we're I'm not muted. Oh, if that is where we're going, I still would like to explore changing that to be that potential use on the other side. Is that not possible with this study?
So I think what Gary said is makes sense here. So if we can put that one large building or two large buildings, because they may want to do it in phases, and show how that fits under our current zoning, adjusted somewhat, we could easily imagine that on the other side as well.
Okay.
So that I think in this one, we just have the capacity to do this smaller space. But I think if we come up and say, hey, I would like that as well, or if that's a better option and it's better on the other side or whatever, I think we could move it around then, because people could understand how much space that it would take. And as we say, the important part is looking at the revenue projection, the water use, the parking, those type of things. So I think we'd at least be able to have a better conversation about what it does.
I guess my overarching concern is that we're not looking at the entire area. I understand this. And if the concern now is just to take out the housing, then I do think we need to look at the entire commercial district going forward. That's my concern. So I think that could maybe be suitable just for a scientific building or just for assisted living. I mean, I think that could be a good spot for a single use. And I think we need to, even if it's on the fringe, incorporate that.
Okay. All right. I don't want to beat this to death, but I think, Sue, do you have enough, to get them going, and then we could meet when they come up with something?
I think I do. I think I can at least put this all down and present the framework back to them, and at least have MAPC getting started on theirs. One other thing that they said that they would do, I asked them to do, is to kind of give a broad overview of development or market, what the market is doing now and what's reasonable, kind of look at the trends so that we know what we're putting out there has some reality to it. So that's another.
Would they give us would there be revenue projections come out of that?
So we're doing revenue projections out of these scenarios.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, Mary, is that a residual hand or a new hand?
It's a new hand. I just wanted to see if we were clarifying that any housing component, are we looking at that as assisted living or senior housing? Or is that to be determined in our comments?
So what I heard is that the Symboli one, the two mixed use at the minimum. So I don't know if the assisted living goes in all of them, or because on its own, it's not housing. If it's in a congregate facility, it's a commercial use. So I guess that's a good question for the board. Do we keep an assisted living type facility in all of these? Given we know that's what the landowner wants to do, or do we not? Do we just keep it in the two mixed use options?
Any comments from the board on that question? Gary Russell?
I think just for the purpose of comparative studies that the Symboli project definitely has senior housing and assisted living, but recall that that proposal also had workforce housing apartments. So it's truly mixed use. And in the other mixed use development, I would say that because the senior assisted living seems to be a specialty use, that it wouldn't necessarily be required to be specific to that use. I think any number of types of housing units could be incorporated into commercial units in one scenario.
Concurrence with that on the board? That Sue, does that answer?
No, sorry, Gary. I guess I wanted you to be more explicit. So I understand that. So my question is, so would there be housing in under the two different density levels of the mixed use? I think we can clearly do that. Is it going to be under the current zoning one as well?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Do we think it's advisable to keep it that type of use in there as well?
Yeah, no, to be clear, my comment meant that I think that the housing should be in the two new scenarios, not the adjusted zoning scenario. But then I got a little off track I thought you were looking also for whether senior housing was specific in one and not the other, or limited to senior housing in one and not the other.
Okay.
Does that clarify my comment?
I think I know where you are.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think that's the general. Mary, are you?
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that my comment was not that they be in each scenario. I was just trying to determine if we're looking at housing, saying, since that was what people were saying, leaning towards was assisted living, senior housing, that those were our needs, is that would be, if we're looking at one of the scenarios being with housing, that would be the housing piece. Not that they would be in all of the scenarios.
Got you. I think I have you. Yes, I think so. I think that's the housing typology that folks are most comfortable with. I think in the full-blown mixed use, we might want to show workforce housing as well, just to kind of, again, compare what you get out of it in terms of revenue. I think it would lead us somewhere, and I think that's the goal of this. Even if we don't find the exact mix of uses, I think once we get the information, then we could move the pieces around to figure out what we do want. Does that make sense?
Okay. Mr. Olney, is that up or down?
No, I think Sue's got it exactly right.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's what we go for.
Okay, Sue, so if you could relay the board's feelings on that to MAPC, and I think we can get started on this, and then we can figure out what they produce, and then maybe have a talk with them.
Great. And we won't go too far down the road before we start the iterative process, because I think that wouldn't be helpful. So that's great. Thank you for that input.
Okay. Next item on the agenda was comments to the massed housing group on the 40B process and schedule. Take this opportunity before I talk about it, is there was a site walk on May 4th. I know Mary, I think you went, correct? And Sue, any comments on the site walk from either of you?
Comments in what regard?
How it went, and any clarity, anything come out of it? Okay.
Yes, it was a rainy day. Definitely clarity, but I'm sure it's, kind of my opinion clarity. So I probably don't need to share that.
Okay. All right, so I
On
provided.
record, this is Christine. I was there also.
Christine, yes. Any comments?
I'm just the general consensus that I heard, not necessarily my opinion, was that you could actually see the visual when we climbed to the top of the hill where the peak would be. So there was a visual from that, but that's
Okay.
some locations of where the wastewater treatment facilities will be, in location to wetlands. So I mean, it was very clear on where things would be located. There was lots of flags. That's it.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
So comments to mass housing on 40B. Again, like I mentioned last meeting, we could treat this as a site plan approval application. We should focus on safety and stormwater. I'm asking that we submit comments to Sue for compilation by May 19th, which is 9 days from now. And we will review the comments on May 24th at our next meeting prior to submitting to the Board of Selectmen. I'm asking to make it easy on everyone. My thought was maybe we can use the comments or the questions we already submitted to the Board of Selectmen way back when. I could throw that out there as a possibility, unless people want to submit new comments. But I just throw that out there to kind of, I think we went through this process. We got a lot of comments or questions, and I think a lot of them still remain. But if we want to send in fresh new comments, get them to Sue by May 19th. Okay. All right. Planners report. Let me see if I can get this on screen. I want this open. Here we go. Stop share. Share screen. Where are you? Okay, Sue, you're the star tonight on this one.
So I don't know if you want to go through each or if you just want me to answer questions. I think maybe I will point out that the board has been asked to present the MAHT DPW site feasibility study to the Board of Selectmen on May 17th. And obviously that's so we can kind of start the conversation about, in particular, about the DPW site. So that should be on our agendas. And I think I would leave it to Chris if he wants to share information or if any answer questions others might have on outreach or other process information on that site, on that study. If no one has questions.
Mr. Only, any comments on the?
Just that we did have a meeting with some of the tenants of the public housing properties. It's a very interesting meeting. I think a lot of fears that some people had about being forced out were allayed, so that was good to get people feeling more comfortable about it. There was quite a bit of talk about the DPW site as being a good option for additional housing. And one of the questions the people wanted things like washers and dryers, which makes perfect sense. And I didn't want to go up and down stairs anymore, and that made perfect sense. One of the questions I asked was whether anyone would object to living in a mid-rise building, 3 or 4 stories. And one woman stood up and said, "When can I move in?" So it was a good meeting and the start of a process that will be going on for probably a couple of years. So that's my report on that.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Chris.
Okay, any comments from the board on Sue's planning report? Mary Foley.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask if under the community one stop, it says that the town has applied to MAPC for a Delta downtown strategic plan. I'm wondering if that's posted and who's kind of heading up. I see there's another one for downtown strategic plan, another grant. So I'm just wondering who's heading up that project, the downtown strategic project.
So like all of the planning efforts, I'm the project manager for those. So with MAPC, you put forth a concept paper or a concept plan, if you will. And then the scope is verified once they determine if they're going to provide funding for that. So in this case, I actually applied for two things from District Local Technical Assistance. That's what the DLTA is. One was for the parking study that we've been trying to get for a couple years. But as I put in as a first choice, an entire downtown strategic plan that would include a parking study. And the reason for that, of course, is that we need to identify a district in our general district down by the train station that would allow multifamily housing by right. So I think probably a number of communities will be asking for that assistance. So that's what that is for. So I would be the project manager.
Okay.
Thanks. No, I understand you're the project. I'm just wondering if it's with a board, if it's with a committee. I just looking for where the documentation would be.
Do you mean where is the? So I guess I don't understand your question.
So usually just projects like this are, attached to a board or committee that are kind of doing the project.
Yes, this would be the planning board.
Oh, okay.
Because in the end, if we get what we want for this downtown strategic plan, regulations, zoning regulations would be one of the deliverables.
Okay, any other comments on the town planner report? Thank you, Sue.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Approval of regular minutes for April 26th. Helene, do we get any comments?
No. Not,
And Mary Foley, any comments?
If you want edits, just two edits.
Okay.
Page 3, under LCD study discussion, I guess it's just one sentence. It's saying much traction with the finance committee and finance committee town planner. So I think there's just duplicate.
Yeah.
Finance committee.
Thank you.
And then under discussion on pursuing 40R, second sentence, it was noted that of a proposal 40B, so that just needs the word of taken out.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you. I'd like a motion to approve the minutes as amended. Is there a second?
I'll second. Yep.
Okay, we'll make a vote. Mr. Coons,
Yes.
Ms. Felicio. Technical difficulties.
Yes.
Ms. Foley,
Yes.
Mr. Gilbert,
Yes.
Mr. Olney,
Yes,
Mr. Russell,
Yes.
and the chair votes yes. Okay, Helene, get them out. Thank you.
Yep.
Some committee and liaison reports. CPC met last week, but I did not attend, so I don't know what went on. I'll wait for the minutes. Anybody else have any subcommittee or liaison reports for the board? Okay. Other matters as may not have been reasonably anticipated. I would just like to say something. Mr. Russell, you want to, I have something first.
Right. Go ahead.
Just
Probably say the
wanted,
same thing I wanted to say.
I just want to mention tonight is Lauren's last meeting with us.
Yeah.
Lauren was appointed to the board in July of 2007 to fill a vacancy left by a board member who had resigned. At that time, he was a 50-year resident of Manchester. Lauren has always impressed me as a clear thinker who does not waste words. He is articulate and to the point. He comments when he feels he has something to contribute. He's non-judgmental and fair. He's lived in the town for 5 decades. He knows the town's histories. He knows the town's bylaws. He's a builder, and he knows everything about the ever-changing Massachusetts building code. So I'd like to express my gratitude, and I'm sure the board's, and thanks to Lauren for his long service to the town, and I will miss him.
Thank you, Ron.
Here, here. Thanks, Lauren.
Yeah, thank you, Lauren. We enjoyed working with you. I really appreciated it.
I'd like to say I enjoyed working with all you and all the past boards I've been with. And Ron, special thanks for you for a job well done chairing. And to Helene, of all people, if it wasn't for her, I don't think I'd be doing this. So thank you, Helene, and enjoy your retirement. Sue Brown, special thanks to you too for all your hard work. I should do it.
Thank you, Lauren. I want to
Thanks.
let you know that
Thank you.
Helene helped me with those words. So let you know. Okay, any other comments from the board? Okay, then I'll take a motion to adjourn for tonight. Is there a second?
I'll
I'll
second.
Okay, motion's been made and seconded. Any discussion? Mr. Coons,
Yes.
Ms. Delicio,
Yes.
Ms. Foley,
Yes.
Mr. Gilbert,
Yes.
Mr. Olney,
Yes.
Mr. Russell.
Yes.
The chair votes yes. Take care, Lauren. We'll see you
Thank
around
you.
town.
Bye,
God
Lauren.
bless you.
Thanks.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Beautiful. That's it. The end.
That's it. Thank you for those words, Helene.
So easy to do him. He's right on. He's deserving. He's great.